Thank you. Wow, that was gorgeous. Such a lovely way to start. So I want to formally welcome Four Arrows to our conversation series for Proven Sustainable, Proven Free, an initiative that we have begun and is stemming from the provensustainable.org website. I'm Kelsey Greene, one of the main designers of the initiative, and our other co-host here is Ketu, and I'll let you introduce yourself and start the discussion.
All right, thank you very much, Kelsey. Grand Rising. That was beautiful. 4 arrows. Wahinkpe Topa, is it?
Wahinkpe Topa.
Wahinkpe Topa. Okay, and which would you prefer to be addressed as?
4 arrows is probably easier for most people.
Okay. Well, I'm going to choose the difficult path and say Wahinkpe Topa. Okay. My name is Ketu Oladuwa, and I'm involved with the series as an interviewer, as poet, as journalist, as the guy who asks the questions. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to speak with you this morning. You have a distinguished career as an educator and as a cultural warrior. And could you just give us a little bit of background about how this path of life appeared for you, how you chose this?
Well, I'm honored to be interviewed by you, Ketu, and that's a good starting question. My heritage in terms of blood, which is really not important so much as other things that we'll talk about, but is Irish mostly, and Shillelagh or Cherokee. But we never had any exposure at all that was positive to Cherokee. So I grew up in a very urban St. Louis County area. After the Marine Corps, Vietnam, I had a chip on my shoulder about the lies. And long before I founded the Veterans for Peace in Arizona, I got the chip off my shoulder by doing whitewater adventures. I tried one in Rio Rique River, the Rio Rique here in Mexico in Copper Canyon, that had never been ascended, trying to be the first to do it. Failed, had a near-death experience. The Raramuri Indian people saved my life. And long story short, although this is talked about in my book Primal Awareness, I realized when I went back to give thanks and live with the people, what an amazing culture these indigenous people had, who had not been exposed to the civilization and religions of the West. And so I quit my work as a health psychologist and went back to get my degree in curriculum and instruction, my doctorate in Indigenous Worldview. And first off right out of the bat, wound up at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, became Dean of Education there, became a sun dancer, and went through one of their 7 sacred ceremonies, which is a relative making ceremony. So this is where I get back to where I talk about blood not being so important. Where they say my spirit's going to go is where the Lakota go, and I have no Lakota blood. So I've spent my last 30 years of my career trying to bring our original worldview that we all of our ancestors shared for 99% of human history before we started polluting the air and the water and our relatives.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing journey and an incredible life. I'm really, really interested in the turn, the challenge that you faced coming out of Vietnam and going into the next phase of your life that involved challenging yourself and exploring nature. That seems to be, for my understanding, that seems to be seminal in who it is you have grown into and who it is you are becoming, because we never arrive. We are always in the process of becoming. And so, can you just speak a little bit about Vietnam and then that transition from anger to insight?
Well, I remember looking at television when I was 19 or 20 at the hippies protesting the war and thinking, how wrong they were, or really not really even thinking. And of course, eventually knowing that they were right. And the consequences of that for me. And so I traded in my Pontiac 1969 Pontiac Firebird for a motorcycle and headed out to San Francisco and joined them. And then from San Francisco, I got into sailing, and tried to go out, just be out in the ocean and try to go around the world, and failed at that. Got seasick. Bought a couple of horses and rode back on the Pacific Crest Trail. And the horses did it for me. The horses gave me a sense of what was right. They were my teachers. And still with the chip on my shoulder, I started doing 100-mile endurance races, but I didn't want to use the Arabian horse. So I went and got the Mustang. I figured that was how I should do it, because I had this sensibility about that. But then whitewater rafting came after the horses, and I found a lot of joy in that. In fact, if anybody gets a chance to watch a new documentary that came out called The River Runner, I never did rivers that extreme, but you'll get the sense of what I'm talking about. And then when I had the near-death experience on the Rio Urik River, it was transformative. And I went back, and the Mustangs that I had been trying to train and in the macho, old-fashioned way, it was a completely different thing. And so if your viewers ever just put in wild horse hypnotist on YouTube, you'll see a TV program where I get on the back of a wild horse and do horse whispering. And so that whole process, really put me on a different trajectory. But then going back many years after the event to try to help the Indians who were struggling with the Fantas drug cartel in terrible ways, and a 3-day hike into where they live, that was really where I saw the positive side of what can be. And it was that worldview. And then when I realized that everything I had been taught about the Indigenous worldview, in terms of schooling, the 1492 and Columbus sailed the ocean blue, that's when I realized that the hegemony, the educational and cultural hegemony facing education, has to be changed if we're going to survive.
Wow. That hegemony that you talk about and the need for it to be changed, is that, I know you've been working your whole life at it, or most of your life at it, but is it really possible?
Well, I would say, let me say it like this. I was at the University of British Columbia doing a presentation just before COVID, and someone asked me if I thought by bringing back our indigenous worldview, looking at two worldviews in a complementary way, but really looking carefully and using trance-based learning and ceremony to transform back to where we should be. If I thought things would turn around, and it just, Ketu, it just blurted out of me. I said no, and you can feel the shudder in the room. And then the logical following question did come up. Well, then why are you doing this work? And I said, because I want to be a human being. And I just wrote a book called Sitting Bull's Words for a World in Crisis, and a little monograph. And I wrote it because Sitting Bull was in an existential crisis like we were. All the buffalo had been killed, smallpox, the soldiers were killing his people, he was on the run. But he never stopped laughing, writing songs, singing his songs, doing his Sundance, being generous, being a human being. So for me, hope is an illusion if it's about outcomes. Okay. If hope is about whatever it is that I'm doing is worth doing, whatever the outcome is, that's what Sitting Bull did. And so to answer your question, I'm not seeing a lot of signs that things will turn around, but I believe the vibrational frequencies that come from work that you guys are doing, and I've looked at it, before I did the interview, and what many are doing, I think that those vibrations will be there for those who rebuild. And that way, those apocalyptic movies that we see that are always just machine guns and patriarchy reestablishing itself, maybe it won't happen that way. So I don't know if that's pessimistic or optimistic, but that's the answer to your question.
It is what it is. I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to kick it to Kelsey and then come back. Indigenous worldview and the worldview that needs to be changed that's in the educational system. What is the distinction between those two? What really is indigenous worldview, and what is happening in the schools that needs to be changed?
Okay, and I want to start by saying that the general scholarship about worldview that sees a culture, an ideology, or a religion as a worldview isn't what I proposed. I use the work of Robert Redfield, who is the father of social anthropology out of the University of Chicago back in the 40s and 50s, who really put the German concept of worldview on the map again in education. And he essentially said there were just three worldviews. There was the metropolitan, which was the dominant one. There was the primitive, which was the indigenous one, and then there was the Eastern. But by the end of his career, he said the Eastern one had been subsumed by the Western one. So the great diversity of cultures and beliefs, and I see them as falling either under the indigenous our original nature-based worldview, and the one that has been dominating us for about 9,000 years. So with that hypothesis said, I have a worldview chart that shows a whole bunch, I think 40 worldview precepts that I can show your readers if you want me to do that. But let's give one example, and that would be anthropocentrism or human-centeredness. If we look at all the great diversity of indigenous languages and place-based knowledge, this great important diversity of which you cannot have expertise and cannot bring into schools without having known the language and done the ceremonies and lived in the culture. If we look at all of them, though, we find common denominators. And I did 4 tours of duty at Standing Rock, and where we had tribes from all over the world, from Africa to Colombia. And I saw those common denominators, and I've seen it in my research. I just got back from 3 weeks with the Kogi of Northern Colombia. And it was remarkable to, again, confirm this worldview. So we could just take that one, that we are not superior to all life forms. There's an egalitarian perspective, a sense of animism, a sense of seeing sentience in trees and in water, things that individuals in the dominant worldview often have who are on the periphery. But the institutions, and that includes education, are grounded in an anthropocentric way and a materialistic way. And I go on down the list, fear-based, on down, right? And so I try to look at the contrast in a non-binary way. We see the Western worldview really is a binary worldview, whereas the indigenous is a non-binary, dualistic complementarity, seeking that balance between the sun and the moon. And so it's really important to look, when we look at the precepts, look at them as a continuum. Where are we now? How can we be? And what have we lost? And what are the consequences and benefits? And when, putting that together that way. I think education can do that. Although, I subscribe to the idea that education is not a place of enlightenment, and I think that I've got Indian country is split down the middle about my work, where half say education is where the problems happen. You're not going to get it to happen there. Others say, no, we need allies. And ultimately, if a generation of people, I've seen this with the Misak Indians who, alcoholism and pot, and just the worst of the worst of what happens to indigenous people after so many years of oppression. In one generation, everybody went from maybe 10 elders speaking the language to the whole culture. They all wear attire that represents it. Their sheep are now growing bigger. Their corn is growing better. The alcoholism is almost nil. You can look go on YouTube and put in Decolonizing the Mind, Misak, M-I-S-A-K, and see their own story. And I can say the same about other cultures but they're all at risk. That's how seductive the dominant worldview is. So the education system is primarily hegemonic in my estimation. The curriculum is there to serve the ruling elite. From Helen Keller to Sitting Bull, the stories are untrue, essentially. Only 3 states in the United States even have curriculum requirements to tell the truth about indigenous history: Montana, Washington, and recently Oregon. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I think it starts at higher education and then jumps to kindergarten. That's the 2 places that I'm focusing on.
Very good, very good. Kelsey?
Yeah, I think so much. Well, I want to actually apply what you said, and I'm looking down at notes that I'm taking along the way. But you mentioned, right, the importance with the indigenous knowledge and the diversity and nuance of it within context, that you really can't necessarily transmit that in education settings or to people who have not fully experienced and lived that or heard the actual languages from their elders. And then, you go on to the duplicities and the powers within the existing formal education settings. And I want to go back to what you said towards the beginning of our conversation about your experiences, that the way you explain them with transformative to a certain nature and appealing to you with horses and with the ocean and with the rivers, that these were all instances even before you had deeper encounters with indigenous cultures, where you had, from my interpretation, a certain sense of learning or reflection and involvement amongst those nature sources. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how you see parallels, or are you drawing on those experiences or personal interests of yours in the more formal academic work that you're doing with advocating for the indigenous nuanced knowledge and way?
Well, you've really made I think a profound observation that I hadn't thought about a lot. And that is that early affiliation and affinity with nature that I had before I, maybe it was because of the rejection and the lack of knowledge of my Cherokee ancestries, and started with the horse. But I like that. Thank you for that. Certainly, not being in nature, not having access to nature, is a problematic and putting forth a worldview about materialism not being healthy for us, etc. But nature really is everywhere, and we are part of it. We are nature, and there are clouds and stars. I know people that have never seen a star in inner cities, but there's weeds growing up through the concrete. There's pigeons on the sidewalks. There's cockroaches and ants. And once we begin to realize the sentience of a tree or a bush, we can do it anywhere, and we can grow gardens on roofs, etc. So I think that connection is certainly vital. And the more one can immerse, the more we can build cities that are like some of the ones that we see in the futuristic ways based on a nature. But no matter how we look at it, we are of and by and part of nature. And if we continue to ignore that, we won't be. We won't be physically here to be a part of that phenomenon. So thank you for that connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to expand upon that, and then we can cross back to Ketu, is so it sounds based off of your response that this heightened awareness of our being of nature is something that is more ingrained in Indigenous cultures and knowledge. And is there additional kind of heightened awarenesses, ways of being that you try to really emphasize in your education work? And in doing so, like, what's your way of really advocating for that?
Well, the worldview chart has become instrumental. Would you like me to show it or just talk about it?
Yeah, you can. And then you can also, if you want to share afterwards, I can include it for viewers as well.
So my students now are almost forcing me to use it. And all the courses that we teach, whatever we're studying, from systems thinking to whatever. I've got a K through 4 literacy teacher who's doing her dissertation on sort of a beginner's approach to learning Indigenous worldview. And she did a presentation on children's books, that K through 2 children's books that are by Indigenous authors and by non-Indigenous authors writing about nature. And then she used the worldview chart to show how they reflect it. So I'll just rigid hierarchy, fear-based thoughts, living without strong social purpose, focus on self and personal gain, materialistic, earth as an unloving it, more head than heart, competition to feel superior, on and on and on, are these kinds of precepts that are about who we are in the world. And of course, I just read you from the dominant culture side. But when we look at this, it is a binary. It is certainly a binary. But when we look at it with the Indigenous approach to complementary duality, which is on one of the sides, then we can begin to reflect on why we do what we do that we know is harmful. We can begin to understand, well, if I believe in hierarchy as a primary factor of life, no wonder I'm suffering this and this is suffering this. The next step is what I call, besides the worldview chart, is the CAT-FAWN connection, CAT-FAWN. And that's the vision that came to me in my near-death experience, where a mountain lion was in a cave that saved us by showing us the way out. And I saw a Tarahumara Indian carrying a fawn that he had literally run down And that stands for concentration activated transformation. What that means is that once we do this cognitive, metacognitive work, the self-reflection on why we think what we think, using worldview reflection and how we balance and move between the West and our original worldview, that only gets the job done halfway. We then need to do what indigenous people would refer to as ceremony. As someone who taught hypnosis at UC Berkeley before I went to my second doctorate, I referred to it as hypnosis because really ceremony is a form of self-hypnosis or of hypnosis. You believe in an image when your brainwave frequency is lower because of the music, the chanting, the expectations, etc. And so we knew ceremony was necessary to be more generous or to hunt better or to weave better or whatever. I saw ceremony or self-hypnosis happening constantly with the men and women of the Kogi last month. And so CAT is the concentration activated transformation that lets us realize, I believe these things that are in FAWN, which is fear, authority, words, and nature. I believe these misguided things about fear, authority, words, and nature because of what Uncle Sam told me when I was 3 years old, or what my teacher told me when I was 10 or whatever. And that's a kind of a spontaneous hypnosis that we are in. One person that has written about CAT-FAWN, Dr. Michael Fisher, who wrote a book on me called Fearless Engagement, said he calls CAT-FAWN a dehypnotizing technology, right? And so, but then we use the phenomenon of self-hypnosis to take the things that we now cognitively know are right and process them so that we have that more automaticity that comes from ceremony. Well, that's a very brief explanation and answer to a very complex question.
Let me jump back in and ask a very simple question. Aren't we here in the West, particularly here in Disneyland in America, aren't we hypnotized?
Absolutely. I think there's no other way that we can say that generally kind and intelligent people would be doing what we are doing to our own air, our own water, without looking at the natural phenomenon that is called hypnosis, called 72 other things also because it has a lot of baggage and misunderstandings. But I absolutely believe that when Dr. Fisher calls it CAT-FAWN, a dehypnotizing technology, that's what we must do. We are hypnotized and we don't know it. And so metacognition and the use of hypnosis, which I learned from the wild horses, they go in and use trance-based learning in ways that are amazing.
Trance-based, yes, trance-based learning is an important aspect of indigenous culture on the African continent, throughout the African continent. And your process of becoming who you are has ridden what we would call the spirit's path to awakening. And you said at the beginning of our conversation, you bypassed the blood connection to get to the spirit connection. And you had to walk a path that was fraught with challenges and self-discoveries that have taken you to the deep well of your spirit, where you are uncovering through a rigorous educational process, a rigorous process of self-discovery, and bringing that learning back into community. that's why I refer to you as a cultural warrior, because you have traveled the path and now you're bringing that knowledge back to community. In bringing that knowledge um, back to the community and understanding that we are hypnotized here in the West, how do you deal with the aspect of belief? People believe they are this and they believe they are that, and they believe what other people tell them, and they believe and they believe. How do you make the distinction between belief and knowing?
Well, your words have been were beautiful. They were powerful, and I worked with the Nigerian educators on what they call the Omoluwabi path,
Mm-hmm.
and those are built into it in the same way that they're built into the Lakota or the Kogi, and it's beautiful to see. To get to that question is, how do we make a distinction? Truth-seeking, Parker Palmer, the great educator who wrote the book The Courage to Teach, is what education is about. And he defines truth as an eternal conversation about things that matter, conducted with passion and discipline. You can't stand on top of the table and say, this is the truth. It's too multifaceted. And indigenous, that's one of the indigenous worldview precepts, is about truth being multifaceted. And so when somebody has a strong belief in education, the first thing is the triangulation of data and research to give support to or against it. But when people's beliefs are so strong, as in religious beliefs, then I found that the indirect approach of using nature and kind of going back to what Kelsey was opening up, getting them out on the paddleboard, just sitting if they don't want to risk standing up, walking in the woods, and then just beginning to, well, I'll give one example, and I've done this all over the world to great effect. I'll start a conference and people will come in. I'll say, before you just set your stuff down, but before we get going, I'd like you to walk out in the hallway, make a left turn, open the doors, and go out on the patio where there's a bunch of trees and bushes and flowers. I want you to touch one real quickly and come back. So people look a little, bemused, and they'll come back in and get ready to sit down. But before they sit down, I go, whoa, wait. You're going to maybe either get mad at me or laugh or something, but please just bear with me. I want you to do it again. Except this time, I want you to ask permission before you touch a plant. And I want you to wait for an answer. And of course, people will guffaw and some of the kids I've done that were, in treatment facilities, they'll say some things, what is this crap or something like that, But I'll tell you what, Ketu, when people come in that room and they then speak out as I ask them to do, there's always someone that cries, always someone that is profoundly transformed. And so I think those kinds of experiences, next to teaching people how to do their own self-hypnosis and realize the hypnosis of their beliefs, like you say, that's CAT-FAWN. That's what the CAT-FAWN connection is. And that's what I did. That was why I was asked to go to Colombia. We had people from all over the world come, and I sat down with some Kogi mamas and Havas, and who were put into caves for 9 years to learn things, that are amazing. And I had translators, and then I would talk about CAT-FAWN, and they would tell me how they do it in their culture. But the people that were at the conference they were writing me letters now, say that they were transformed. So it's worth continuing the work.
I'm 17 questions just in my head. But speak a little bit more about your stay with the Kogis.
Well, because of my indigenous worldview work, there's a foundation there that really felt that that would be a way to get the Kogi more protected because they're at risk like every culture.
Mhm.
But they are probably holding on to the old ways more than 90%, 95% of all indigenous cultures. They live on a pyramid-shaped mountain that's the tallest coastal mountain peak in the world. You can be sitting in the warm ocean right at the base of it, and you're looking up at snow-capped mountains. So they have every climate. The trail up there is horrendous. You got to be in great shape to even get to the first villages. And the Spanish never conquered them, right? And if your listeners go to YouTube and watch Alan Reyes's film Aluna, A-L-U-N-A, you'll see, and the previous one, where they warned the younger brother about the suffering of Mother Earth. And so it was fantastic to be able to listen and me to learn what they do and how they do it with the women's weaving and the men's use of the purpur. I mean, I could go on forever on this. I'm just kind of simulating, but mainly the thing was they got to see that there are other cultures that are the heart of the world struggling like they're starting to struggle. And I got to see how the worldview precepts that I've been endorsing and researching for so many years are confirmed by those who are still living in that way.
How much of your time do you spend in silence?
Well, I do Kundalini yoga every morning, and part of that is has the silence. I do here I use the architecture of a temescal, but I use an anipi ceremony or purification lodge, and oftentimes I'm by myself in there, so I'm not teaching. So I sing the songs, and I had a terminal cancer diagnosed in 2008, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they insisted on the chemo and the surgery, which I didn't do. Instead, I did really, what I call the indigenous way: vitamin D from the sun, organic food, exercise, the ceremony, self-hypnosis, etc., and have had a spontaneous remission. Silence in indigenous cultures is truly golden, to quote a Western philosopher. But it requires, I think, really tuning in before the meditative silence into the realization that spirits are all around. When I have people come into the lodge, when I say the word prayer, it's not praying to some entity. It's inviting in spirits of ancestors, spirits of trees, spirits of the animals, spirits. And when you look up in that darkness, you're going to start to see kind of in the black, a gray shadows forming like a cloud. And when you see that, I want you to remember that, because that will have great significance in your life. But I was skeptical, oh man, on Pine Ridge, when I started to see things that just didn't make sense from a logical way. It took me, Rick Two Dogs used to come up to me. He was the Sundance chief. He used to come up to me, I can't tell you how many times in the early days, and he'd put his arm around me and he'd say, "Hey, Doc, analyze that." And so I think that's one of the more important indigenous worldview precepts. But I think the silence coupled with that is where the magic happens.
Okay. We are so tuned in this Western culture to understanding what the words mean. I'm a poet. I tell anytime that I have the opportunity to read, I make it clear to people, I try to make it clear to people that The poetry is not in the words. The poetry is in the silence and in the space between the words. And it's in the sound that the words make, because the words are only symbols. The letters and the words are simply symbols. And we are connecting those sounds and those symbols that we see are connecting to our central nervous system. And that's where the real meaning is at. The question is, you are an educator who is using the box of this language to communicate with students, more than likely, who only understand things from a word meaning interpretation perspective. How do you communicate with them from your spiritual knowledge of yourself and what the world is that we are and live in? How do you communicate with them?
You get out of that box, you close the door. And that's what my daughter does. She's got a private school in Topanga Canyon for very young children. And it's what I do for my doctoral students. No letter grading, students taking control of what they want to learn and how they want to learn it. We open, and as I failed to do, well, we kind of did with the flute. Thank you for that. But I always open with a Lakota prayer. Maybe we can close with one. I have the students also say a non-denominational invocation to bring the spirits into the however you conceive of the spirits. And we use the worldview chart, which has got a number of things that require a sense of spirituality. Giving significance to others is how I really define that. And I think that out of the boxness has been, it's been radically opposed. I've been fired, from universities. I barely got tenure at Northern Arizona University and they didn't give me tenure. Actually, they said, what we'll do is we'll give you 2 more years to see if you can better understand our white students. And I said, no, you got to fire me. That's the policy if you're not going to give me tenure. So they gave me tenure. And then when they gave me tenure, I moved to Mexico. So it's not it's easy. And fortunately, Fielding Graduate University is trying. I'm a sore thumb for them in a lot of ways, but they have a president, and I came here because they had more indigenous doctoral degree graduates than any university in the world. They're trying. They were trying. And now we have just hired an indigenous diversity director. And I wrote a book I fought against hiring a chief diversity officer. I think that's using the system to fix a problem that by hierarchy, forcing diversity and inclusion does not work. And I wrote a book called The Red Road, connecting diversity and inclusion initiatives to Indigenous worldview, in which I really say we shouldn't be doing that. We should be grassroots, bottom up. But we hired an Indigenous person for it, and she is going to do that. And she is going to do the decolonizing and indigenizing, which is, has been talked about, but very rarely done in the United States. So I'm still hopeful, in the way that we described and defined hope earlier.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm ready to sign up. I'm ready to come back and get my PhD. Okay, yeah. But it'll have to be with you. It'll have to be in Mexico, and it has to be.
Well, listen, I want to be a poet when I grow up, and so I've written a number of poems myself, and next time I recite one of them, I'm going to listen to how those silent spaces and the energy in between the words work. So I thank you for that.
Kelsey.
Yes, yes. I actually want to loop back because you have referenced it now, and we didn't necessarily give it its space in the beginning of the conversation around the song that you played. And if you want to speak at this time a little bit more to, that song, the instrument you were playing on, and what that both symbolizes, signifies. Yeah, I want to
Sure. Well,
bring it
once
back,
upon
bring
a
the music
time-
back.
Yeah, once upon a time, there was a young man who fell in love with a lady, and they were living in the Black Hills of South Dakota, two Lakota people. But he didn't have the words to woo her. And boy, the young braves were lined up at her teepee. So he went up on the mountain and he cried for a vision. We call that ombleche. And lightning came and hit a tree branch of cedar tree, and it dropped a branch to the ground. And right away, a woodpecker came over and poked in 6 holes. And then all the animals of the forest came. Oh, first, right before that was the anteaters. They hollowed it out. Then the animals came and breathed into it. So he knew, well, he was part of that. So he picked it up also and followed their teachings, and he blew into it. And the lady heard it, and she started walking up the mountain, and he looked down and saw her. He started walking down to her, and of course they got married. So that's the start of this, one of the stories about the Lakota flute, which was actually almost gone until a white doctor brought it back. So that's the allyship part of it. The story itself of the song is very, very sacred. Carlos Nakai, the great flute player, taught it to me. The lyrics is what's powerful. It's a song that was sung by the mothers on the Cherokee Trail of Tears. Mm-hmm. And you all know what the Trail of Tears was. My people, were forced out of the area by a president very much like Donald Trump, who said, well, even though the Supreme Court said it's wrong, I got the cavalry, right? Many people died, many horrors happened. But every night, the mothers sang a lullaby that said, did you see the beautiful animals in the clouds? Did you see the dancing grasses? Did you see the beautiful colors of the fish when we crossed the brook? Did you hear the sounds of the meadowlark? And whenever I play that, I get teary-eyed, because it says so much about, they were certainly in an existential situation, as we are with the pandemic and deforestation and climate change. But if we can have that kind of seeing the beauty around, I think it's a requirement for activists. I believe that activists burn out because the focus is too much on the problems. And so you gotta play the piano, have music, sing, write poetry, be generous, see the magic and the colors of the insects, etc.
Yes. Wow, it's great that it weaves everything together. Yes. Sorry, Ketu, you were saying something.
Is that a drone flute that you were playing?
It's a double. I had them. It's a double, and it's got the Turtle Island for the birdie, is what we call. One of our sun dances was actually a horse dance, the first one that was done since Crazy Horse. So I have the 4 horses, and this one was mine, the Yellow Dun, of the Wolf Clan in the Cherokee tradition, and that's the wolf print and the.
Okay.
Yes, and then one side of it is just that, and then the other is a regular flute.
Okay. Beautiful instrument. Your teaching in the classroom, how much are you able to bring native speakers, indigenous livers into the classroom?
I do it fairly often, and I also try to get the external advisor for a number of my students' dissertation committees. I also try to get those. So just in this year, I've had Greg Kaheti, who is director of Native Studies at University of New Mexico. I've had Martin Brokenleg as you know, and so I think that's really important. About 70% of the Navajo, I have about 9 to 14 Navajo students, and about 70%, according to them, of their nation has kind of lost their way. They've lost the language, they've lost the traditions, they've turned against the traditions. One of my students did his doctorate on how the leadership is leaning much more toward the dominant ways. And for example, they sent a bunch of people to Israel to learn how to do agriculture, and didn't go to the elders who know all about sheep raising, right? That kind of a thing, right? So I think, I think in the decolonizing and indigenizing movement, decolonizing is about looking at the things that we do that are harmful, racist, without egalitarian qualities. Indigenizing is, what do we do to fix that? I think that's missing. I mean, the film that came out recently that I hope everybody gets a chance to watch, as difficult as it is. There's 2 of them. One is King Leopold's Ghost, the documentary. That I told my students, this is going to be one of the most difficult documentaries you've ever watched. So I want you to be watching it with this in mind. List all the things that are happening today that relate to that horror. And they told me if they hadn't have done that, they wouldn't have been able to watch it. The other one is Exterminate the Brutes, the 4-part series. Now, in both of those cases, I'm critical that what was lost is not there. We're talking about the horror of genocide, which makes people real. But too few are talking about, and I've criticized, as much as I honor those 2 documentaries, I criticize them for not going to what was missing. So we can't decolonize without indigenizing. And indigenizing, we can't do it with place-based knowledge. We got to bring people in for that. But there's so few. So what's our best next thing? The worldview that belongs to all of us. I was my co-author for our forthcoming book from North Atlantic Press, which is called Recovering Our Kinship-Based Worldview. And Darcia Narvaez is from Notre Dame. And I put on a conference in which we got to invite some of the top indigenous scholars in the world. After the first day, we had a conflict. And some of the people that I invited said, we should not be teaching this stuff to this primarily white audience. And I had brought White Standing Buffalo, a Cree Sundance chief who doesn't even have a high school degree, I don't think. And I had to really talk hard because all the rest of them were PhDs to get him there. But boy, I knew then why I had brought him. And I said, White Standing Buffalo, would you speak to that? Because if I had spoke to it, I'd have been way too strong. Because that was why we had the conference, is to teach it to non-Indian educators. And so he started out in a soft way and began to speak in very indirect ways, and kind of then said, no one owns these truths, and convinced everybody that we should go forward. And Fool's Crow, a great respected Lakota man, he said that anyone who doesn't understand that this medicine is for everyone and that we need allies. But so it's about having a good heart. It's about, but on the other hand, I totally appreciate and understand my brothers and sisters who have that other side. We've had everything stolen, everything. And now they're stealing the spirituality. And I concede that the risk is great that in teaching worldview, people will take it and then forget about the indigenous people, who not knowing the distinction between the place-based knowledge, which is even more important, right? And yet, if in those places, probably like New York City, where no one remembers the flora and fauna wisdom, it's time to re-indigenize ourselves. But you got to start with the worldview. So it's tricky business. It's a tricky business. And I have a peer-reviewed article called The Indigenization Controversy, For Whom, By Whom, that if everyone reads that, they will have the confidence to go forward with teaching and learning about indigenous worldview with respect.
The decolonizing process. As an educator, as a cultural warrior, not speaking to a class, but speaking to an individual, how would you recommend that they approach the decolonization of mind?
I would say, so how are things going? And I'd wait. And eventually, you're going to hear things aren't going so well somewhere in the system. Why do you think that's happening? And have you had a chance to look at this chart where I kind of show some precepts that scholars throughout the ages have put down as generally defining the worldview that operates our schools, and generally defining a nature-based one that all of our ancestors used? Would you have a look at that with me and see if that problem resonates because of one of those things on the left side, or couldn't be solved by one of those things on the right side, or a combination of them? I mean, that's a good start.
Okay. That's a good start. That's a very good start. The chart that you mentioned, the indigenizing chart that you mentioned, we want to make sure, Kelsey, that we get a hold of that. Yep. So that it can be available to folks who tune in.
I'm happy to send it.
The last question I have, your wisdom, your knowledge, your understanding, the path that you have taken, where is it taking you to next?
I don't know.
I love that answer.
I don't know. I'm learning. I'm just learning all the time of what I'm doing wrong, what I could do better. I'm learning. The more I learn, the less I know, I think. And I know that this path somehow makes sense because we are nature. So how can we not have a nature worldview, And so and because of in the last year, I've gotten so many requests. I'm doing Antioch College soon. I'm doing the University of San Diego State University October 4th. I did Paris yesterday. I mean, it's just people are waking up and saying, you know what? It's hard to think of. Well, I'll give you one that came out of Boston University School of Business. Somebody that had never heard of any of this worldview or even decolonizing stuff, and she said something to the effect, but much better than I'm going to be able to say. She said, looking at the worldview chart, she said, "Oh my God, how simple is that?" And I just threw my hands up and I went, yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it like that. But when she said it, I just like right now, even just repeating it, I got goosebumps, you know. I mean, really, you know. I mean, my daughter and I did write a book many years ago. Noam Chomsky and Parker Palmer and Vine Deloria Jr. were three of the endorsers of it. It was called Teaching Virtues, Building Character Across the Curriculum. This for kindergarten, first, second, and third graders. And my daughter and I wrote it based on Lakota and other indigenous precepts, where when you teach a lesson plan, like whatever course it is, start with the virtue: generosity, patience, fortitude, honesty, courage, humility, right? Honesty. And because that's how we did it. We didn't go out and make a bow and arrow until people really understood the generosity of sharing the meat or whatever, right? And then I wrote a book much later, I think in 2013, called Teaching Truly, a Curriculum to Indigenize Mainstream Education. And the Chicago Wisdom Project selected it amongst 20 books where, I mean, Paulo Freire and John Dewey. I mean, I was up in the ranks of people who I, you know, were sort of heroes of mine in many ways. And in it, the reason I was surprised is in it, I take each course in Common Core standards, and these are in higher, like maybe junior to high school, and I show the hegemony. I show the corporate hegemony. Like, for example, in the medical health education, it's almost all about how to access the medical field, right? Very little prevention. Mathematics, on down the line. You know, I was blown away to find the hegemonic things that are really serving the status quo and not. And then I would talk about how is it working? How are we doing in these different fields of study, geography or whatever? And then I show not too well. And then I say, if indigenous ways of teaching this would be used, and they wouldn't, because the courses would be all combined, they wouldn't be fragmented in the first place. But if they were, what would it look like? And that's what the book is, right? And so it's, you know, I guess my point is it's coming back, and that's kind of keeping me going. What I want to do next, I've been thinking it's time for me to move on from fielding. In spite of, I get to teach in my swimming suit after surfing, and it's wonderful people, wonderful professors, but I've been there almost 20 years now. And the indigenous worldview and decolonizing part is still just fragmented when people take my course. I want to go someplace that says we want to create the first decolonizing, indigenizing worldview reflection degree or program. And there's nobody doing that. There was a certification program in North Carolina recently in decolonization, but no degree program, right? And that's kind of something that we talked about in Colombia, but my wife doesn't want to move there. So, but anyway, so I guess, you know, it's a wonderful mystery, wonderful mystery. And I think that's an important part of what people, I hope, walk away with is the mysterious, all the terms for what we call God in all the cultures I've studied that are traditional indigenous cultures. They're like in Lakota, Wakanda. And what it really is, it's a verb. First of all, it's not even a noun. So it's a verb, like most of the indigenous languages are verb-based. So you can't concretize so easily. But it's great mysteriousing. That's essentially the best translation, great mysteriousing. And the idea when I go into the lodge, I say, you'll hear that word mentioned briefly, and then we're going to go right to Unchimaka or Tunkashila, which is grandmother, grandfather, because whatever that great mysteriousing power is in everything and everyone. It's in each person when we're at our highest self. It's in the trees, it's in the thing. And so most of our songs will start out, you know, or we'll focus on that, because how can you continue speaking to something that is so incomprehensible, right? And so I think this idea of mystery, this idea of prepare that we are a spirit inhabiting a body and getting in touch with that fearlessness of death. I've never met a traditional indigenous person who had a fear of death. And I don't think I've ever met one that had a fear of life. I remember at Standing Rock, maybe close with this, a Crow Indian was a paramedic, and I was an EMT, and I was helping train the volunteers from all over the world who were medics, who were gonna go up on the line, you know, to help with putting milk and magnesia in the eye when people pepper sprayed us or worse. And they were, you know, he said something that just shocked me. He said, so look, now in the morning, we're going to be going up on, you're now ready to go up on the line almost. He said, I say almost because if they start shooting at us with rubber bullets or the Raytheon machine goes on, most of you are going to turn and run. In fact, the only two people that won't are 4 arrows and I. And my first thought was, oh man, why did he end that way? That's insulting to these kind, generous volunteers that are risking themselves to do this. But then I realized, you know, when he said it and the way he said it, that he was preparing them, you know, but it was true also, you know, that at first that's what they're going to do. And that's built into the worldview also. So the mysteriousness and what I call the fearless courage to act. That means once the emotion of courage gets you to say, I'm going to jump off the cliff, when your feet leave, you trust the universe. You trust the universe, whatever the outcome, you know, because you made that decision. Kind of gets full circle back to our idea of hope, doesn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
it does.
definitely.
It does. And what is the same? Mitukweye Oyasin?
Well, are we closing now?
Well,
I have one more question.
I could go all night. Don't.
All right.
You guys have a time schedule.
Well,
I could say I could go all night because you guys are so exceptional, and your questions and insights are just delightful for me.
Well, I want to make sure, as we're talking so much about the presence of nature and the importance of place, to acknowledge our environment right now, this virtual space that we are navigating and have spent so much time in over the past year and a half, you know, heavily because of the COVID pandemic, and also translating that to the growing virtual spaces where learning are taking place, and tying that specifically even to this initiative, the Proven Sustainable initiative, which has the goal of providing educational resources and shifting perspective through a site that's full of resources and collected documents. And so, sorry, this question's kind of twofold, and you can choose how you want to respond to it, but it's, you know, within specifically the context of, you know, your views and your experience engaging with and views with the Proven Sustainable site and initiative, but then that framed within kind of this larger question about your perspective on online learning and how you're bringing forth, or like kind of insights on how to bring forth this Indigenous knowledge and advocacy in virtual or digital spaces. So those, sorry, that's kind of the layered inquiry I want to end with.
Well, I mean, I think everyone knows that we do better in person for all the reasons we understand. On the other hand, we are at a place in the world now where there's a carbon footprint, even in good times, that makes it iffy whether we should do virtual or not. So I'm a fan of virtual. As long as people remember to get out in nature. It's about balance. Right? It's about a flowing balance. What's happening today is, you know, like the last child in the woods phenomenon. And I think that that's a tragedy. So it really depends what is going to be on the virtual. So here we are, we've said it at least 5 times, go out there and find nature and let it teach you. Whether you'll find it somewhere, guaranteed, make it an adventure. So I think that has to happen. The sustainability, you know, there's one of the most exciting things that I did at Fielding not too long ago was there was a conference that was being held in Santa Barbara at a big hotel, and they had congressman, a governor, mayor, and the head of the Chumash tribe, the chairman, and they were talking about water resources. And it turned out that the Chumash, their policies and ways of handling water were something, don't quote me, but like 20 times better than any other county in California. And so when they were done, they opened it up to questions and answers. And I jumped up on the microphone. And I didn't know how, because he was, the tribal chairman, Kenneth Kahn was his name. He was in a suit and tie and with, very, very non-Indigenous colleagues up there at the table. But I asked him, I said, your statistics are absolutely remarkable. And I have a question. Does spirituality and your tribe have anything to do with that? And I knew it was an unusual question to ask in that particular format with and some of the people in the audience squirmed. And this is what he said. I just pulled it up while I was talking. Absolutely, he said. And I mean, I just shivered. Absolutely, that's the driver. Traditional water is provided to us by Mother Earth. And whatever we take, we give back with tobacco or a prayer. It is the driving factor in how water is used also. We may be small, but we can put restrictions in place and can sustain a degree of sacrifice. But no doubt our worldview is the driver. And this respect is about balance and our relationship with all things. And so that was in person, but it could have been virtual, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question. I think that it's what's presented, how it's presented, taking the time like you guys are doing so that sound bites are not going to have to be all that exists. Bringing in spirit as best we can, as you did with asking me to play the flute. I think it's the best we can do. I also think that meetings in the nice weather, in person, shouldn't be restricted if possible. If there's ways to do it in local communities, people can say, "Look, we don't want you to come in our classroom. Let's meet in Fogarty Park and start having some classes." I think that even the science would show that the risk of being outside and wearing a mask is very, 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 very low. And why sacrifice? This idea of having people stay inside, I think, is much more unhealthy, much more unhealthy. They should be exercising twice a day. They should be outside, and they should be talking to each other. We had New Jersey and New York were the two worst hit and we can understand that because of the traffic pollution. This virus likes to move. This teacher, I call it, likes to move over the molecules of pollution. But then the Navajo reservation was first in the world with deaths. I've had 9 of my students who have lost people. And it's because of all the 620 uncapped uranium mines and the pollution of the air. So I think that what we've got to start talking about in this pandemic as we use virtual reality is we've got to talk about real reality. What's the cause of this? And it's deforestation. That was the cause of the first one in the 13th century. Deforestation and our disrespect for animals and how we're bringing animals together that shouldn't be with other animals and shouldn't be with us, but hardly any talk about that, right? So I'd like to close, if I will, with a Lakota.
One more thing before we close.
Good. Oh, good.
We don't want to let you go.
Oh, good.
Before we close. That addressing of the need for balance in the Indigenous worldview, the respect for all that exists in nature and understanding that we are nature as well as the cockroach and the sequoia. In that worldview, the understanding that we didn't come here to stay and that dying is a part of life and that death has to be accepted as a part of life and honored as a aspect of life that we cannot escape. How do you cross the barrier of communicating information to people who grow up with a fear of death and who want to stay here forever, knowing but know absolutely that it is not possible? How do you cross that barrier?
I do it every time I do an Inipi ceremony. I do a couple a week. I did it in Colombia. We had a river right next to they built an Inipi lodge for me there. I have people at one of we do 4 rounds. The first round we pray for ourselves so we can help others. The second round we pray for others with 4-legged, 2-legged swimmers, crawlers, enemies. Third round we pray for women to get their balance back in the world and for our solar and lunar balance in ourselves. And our last round we give thanks. And in the third round, I talk about what you're saying. And I said, when we exit, and sometimes we'll do it like the Navajo midstream, like in after the second or third round, but sometimes usually we wait till the end. Here I do the ocean because we're only 90 steps from the ocean. I say, what I want you to do, no matter how cold that ocean is or that river is, I want you to walk in silence when we leave here with the idea that your death is on its way and you're going to die. And I want you to imagine that as soon as your feet touch the water, you're going to just plunge in. You're not going to hesitate. I want you to have a death song that shows how confident you are. And you walk into that, you feel that cold on your knees. You're not going to hesitate and go, oh, I don't want this, I don't want to do it, or anything like that. You're going to immediately plunge into that water. I want you to stay floating face down in that water, imagining the beauty of the mystery, the wonder of your spirit now having gone from the body you chose and the learnings that it gave you into whatever is next. And I want you just to really do that. And oh my gosh, somebody just sent me a 4-minute video of that happening. He was a top producer in Colombia. And I told him he couldn't take any images of the ceremony, but he did do a sound of us singing inside. And there was one place where all the women were singing, because I did a lodge for women and a lodge for men. And there was this unbelievable musical singing background. And then he showed the men walking out to the river and plunging and their feet, and then listened to some monkeys up in the hills. And I mean, it was just done so poetically that it just gave me shivers. I'll try to get him to send it to you if you'd like it. But you could see when people came up out of their death moment, it's the first time they had ever thought about imagining and being dead, and so I think it's really important. It's also important in the understanding of how we look at spirits and ancestors. One of the things that I gave a presentation with 3 soil scientists not long ago, experts in their field, and talking about what's happening to soil. And they had brought me in, and I went last, and they had brought me in to talk about it from an indigenous perspective. So each one gave a presentation. And when I got up, I kind of, in a good humor, I said, I've learned so much from my 3 colleagues on the panel, but everything that they said isn't going to do any good. And, I kind of winked at them. And then I showed a slide in which I had 3 other great people. I said, that's how I said it. I said, there's 3 other great people that say what they say. Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Mahatma Gandhi, and Wendell Berry. I want you guys to look at this slide, and I want you to read what they say about soil, which is very much what we just learned. Roosevelt says a nation that destroys its soil destroys itself, something like that. Gandhi said, we cannot forget to dig the earth and to tend the soil, because it's like, it's just it's so important for our lives. Wendell Berry, the great environmental educator, said, without proper care for the soil, we can have no life. Then I showed a presentation of Chief Seattle, and let me get it real quick. This is what Chief Seattle said. And I asked him, I said, I want you to say, what's the difference between the three of the great people and what Chief Seattle did? Here it is. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Even the rocks thrill with the memories of stirring events connected with the lives of them. The very dust upon which we stand responds lovingly to our footsteps. Now, people raised their hand and they got it. They got it. They saw the difference. I said, that's the difference, right? And so this idea of the dust of our ancestors relates to what your question was, and the whole interconnectedness. If we realize that interconnectedness, then death becomes a part of life. And being somebody that had a near-death experience, I didn't know about Ray Moody's study about the light and the amazing music and the seeing your life go before you and the forgiving. I didn't know about any of that. Now I've read, like, he's got like 10,000 case studies. People, can know about that at least too, to be able to because if we're well, can I end with a poem?
Please.
This is a poem I wrote in the Marine Corps. I think I'm going to remember it. Oh, if I don't, I'll be embarrassed. That I may die upon the morrow, the probability is high. And though my love may weep in sorrow, still I know that I must try, that I must try to dare it all in spite of fear or danger. That I must answer every call so life won't be a stranger. Oh, is it courage that makes me challenge dying, or merely the belief that death is timed by fate? Should I try and keep on trying, or merely sleep and eat and wait? For many, life is mere survival. But I was blessed with strength and wealth to search for the answers vital to bring the world back to health. So let this poem be my epitaph. I merely wondered and I tried. I fought, I loved, I laughed, I cried. But it was while living life I died. Oh, I did it.
All right. Very good. Thank you so much. And from the perspective of the Omoluabi, deep respect, much gratitude, and love.
Nishante atawa Oglala ke not na pechu zepe. O yate o yasi unchi wichalpo. O chakipo. Echu wichozani washte. Uni wapikdeo. O yate o yasi chankuluta o knaman. O wichakipo. Ihani loko wichwaki tunkashi kisi. Metako yasi.